Broadcasting people should be coming in, guys.
58, 75. That was a big jump, wasn't it? 90, 95. Wow. Too many numbers for me to keep up with. So let's see. Can we put something in the chat? Hello, everyone. Let's see if everybody knows where the chat is and can they reply. You too as well, panelists. Let's get chatting to people. Hello. So who've we got? Oh, here we go.
Hi, everybody.
Kirsty, Matt, Jasmine, going far too fast for me. Tom, Sylvia, hi. Evening all.
Hi, Rachel. She's putting her hand up.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so where is everybody from? That's what Chris is asking. Let's see where people are from. Oh, Wales. Oh, no, that's you, Becky. I'm like, yeah, Wales. No, that's you.
Cornwall,
Derby. It's going so fast. Oh, Yeovil.
That's Germany.
Derbyshire, Doncaster, Yorkshire. Excellent.
It's going so fast I can't read it.
Excellent. Northern Ireland. Oh, Manchester.
Is there anyone from Essex?
Yes, Colchester.
Yeah, there you go.
Colchester. Norfolk, Wales. Oh, Birmingham.
Wow.
South Africa.
Wow.
Another Manchester.
Spain.
Canada.
Brazil.
Awesome.
Burnley.
Absolutely fantastic. Suffolk.
Amazing.
Kent. Wow, a lot of Southern. Oh, South Yorkshire. I saw that. Barnsley.
Annesburg.
I'm only saying the places that I know where they are, just so I don't show myself up on my geography. America. I know where that is.
Hey.
Spanish. Living in
Austria.
Welcome.
Greetings.
Bingley. Wow.
Indonesia.
Near Redditch. Being a bit cagey there. Near Redditch. Georgina, thank you. I've missed you as well. Big up Bradford. Nikki, hi. Paul, hi. Bangladesh. Good. Excellent.
Broadcasting around the world.
Yeah, coming to you live from all over the UK.
Oh, Salford. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining in and our first of a series of webinars on the fear factors of theory and how to address them. I'd just like to add that tonight has been overwhelming demand, so apologies if we can't answer every single one of your questions, but it will be explained shortly, so please do still write in the chat, and Siobhan will try and answer as many as she can. So I'm Mary. I studied the BA Social Work at Anglia Ruskin University at Chelmsford, and I'm currently working as an undergraduate at Essex County Council while I'm waiting my qualification and registration. So let me tell you about us and how we all started. So we come together just over a week ago for the first time after a fabulous idea on Twitter, and what a wonderful experience it has been for all of us. And what makes it even more wonderful is that every single one of us is at such a different part of the social work journey. So we have year ones, year twos, step up, apprentice, frontline and newly qualified. So it's amazing really what's been achieved in such a short period of time. So reflecting and applying social and connecting social work theory and practice is so important. And given that learning opportunities have changed so much and people are expected to adapt to such a different way of working, we felt that doing a series of webinars focusing on the need led by you would be needed for social work students and also for practitioners currently in practice. By encouraging these interactions, we aim to offer discussions, new learning opportunities, advice and share our own insights. So before I hand over to our fabulous host Siobhan, I would like you to meet the rest of our team. Kelly, over to you.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll introduce myself and then one of our tech team. I'll come to each of the panellists in turn to introduce themselves, and then I'll pass to Siobhan for the content. So my name is Kelly. I live in Bradford, but I'm from Manchester, which is why I've got a bit of a funny accent. I'm at the University of Bradford. I'm studying the BA Social Work, and I'm just about to finish my first year. So I will introduce Omar, who is, I don't know if you can see him, but he's on our tech team. So he's currently whizzing away behind the scenes, clicking all sorts of buttons, spotlighting things, clicking things, letting you all in and being generally kind of fantastic. So Omar is at the University of Birmingham. He's doing the BA Social Work and he's also in his first year. So then next I will come to Becky. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Becky. I'm from Cornwall, but I live in Wales, have done for a while. I'm attending University of South Wales. I'm doing a Bachelor of Science in Social Work, and I've just finished my year 2. So, yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Cheers for that, Becky. So next up is Chris.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris. I live in Dorset and work as well. I'm studying with the Open University with a BA in social work. I'm in my 3rd year and currently still on placement and graduate later in the year.
Excellent. Cheers for that, Chris. Next up is Kat.
Hi everybody, I'm Kat. I'm also from Dorset. I work for Dorset Council and I'm a 3rd year social work student studying BA social work with Open University. And I've got 10 days left of my final placement before I start my new position in children's.
Wow, thanks for that, Kat.
Thank you.
Next up is Kerry.
Hey everyone, I'm Kerry. I'm studying through the Think Ahead scheme, so that's where you do an MA in social work, but you do it in a year. So I've got about 12 days left from placement before I start as an unqualified social worker in a mental health team until I hopefully get my Social Work England registration. And I'm going to be in the chat box with everyone today, just interacting and saying hello. So do let us know what you think of the presentation.
Excellent. Cheers for that, Kerry. The only thing we've got to say about that is wow. In a year, wow. Okay, so next up is Emma.
Hi everybody, my name is Emma Grady and I'm a 2nd year student at Edge Hill University. I'm studying mental health nursing and social work as a combined master's programme, and it's a 4-year course, so I should be going into year 3 in September. So yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Cheers for that, Emma. We also have another panellist who may be coming on later. I'm not entirely sure. So I'll introduce you if that's okay, Melanie. So we have Melanie Malcolm, who graduated in 2013 from Staffordshire Uni. She's a practice educator, a new practice educator, has just had a first student and will be submitting the first assignment at the end of June. So if we manage to get the technology working, we might hear from Melanie a little bit later, or maybe in one of the future webinars. So that's it from us as a team. So I'll pass on to Siobhan now to introduce herself and to get the webinar started. Over to you, Siobhan.
Thanks very much, Kelly. So that team of students have been amazing at helping me bring together some webinars. I think everybody will be switching off their microphones now, other than my own microphone. Everybody who's present, your camera is off, your microphone is off. But if you want to interact, there's going to be some polls up during the presentation. There's the chat, which Kerry will be managing, and there is a question and answer box. If you pop some questions in, Kat will pass those questions over to me as we run through the presentation. I've also had some questions from you before tonight's session, and I'm going to try and answer some of those in the presentation. I won't be able to answer all of them because we have been inundated with questions, but I think that what that shows is how much these webinars are needed by social workers and students all over the world. We're planning to do a series of webinars that address theory and critical reflection. My name's Siobhan McLean. I've been a social worker for 30 years. I'm a visiting professor at the University of Chester, and I've spent the last 20 years of my career trying to make theory and reflection more accessible for social work students. During that time, I have realised that there is a lot of fear around social work theory. So our presentation tonight is, I'm trying to think, my presentation isn't moving, guys, and it was moving earlier. Is there a reason? Thank you.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you. So I've realised that over the years that I've been working in social work, that there is a real fear around theory in social work. So we decided to do the first presentation this evening to explore the social work theory fear factor in practice. Now, the fear factor is something that everybody can experience at any stage of a social work learning journey. So at the first year of your training, or right at the end of your training as a student, you can experience this fear factor. But everybody experiences a fear factor at some point along their social work journey. And it can happen at any stage, or it can stay with you at every stage of your journey. One of the key things about our journeys as social workers is that we travel incredibly complex journeys. The things that we do as social workers are really complex. And over the years that I've been a social worker, I think things have become more complex. The situations that we're dealing with are more complex. Some of the legislation that we address is more complex. Societal issues are more complex. And certainly working through this global pandemic that we're all addressing now, things are becoming even more complex for us. Through my whole career, I've found one framework has helped me to address that complexity and work through it. And that framework is a simple framework of what, why, how. So whenever I'm working in social work, I'm going to see a service user, I'm thinking to myself, what's happening for this person? Why has this situation come about? How can I work with them to bring about improved outcomes? It's the most important thing that we can do as social workers to somehow slow down our thinking and think through what, why, how. The danger is, though, that we're so busy in contemporary practice that sometimes the why question falls off our agenda. And we end up doing what's happening, how am I going to deal with it? What's going on? How am I going to respond? And we lose perhaps the most important part of being a social worker. We lose the why question. In my mind, then this framework where the why question has now fallen off and it's become what and how, that's a medical model of practice. Medical model practitioners just work to what's the diagnosis, how do we treat it, or what's the treatment, how do we prescribe it. What we do as social workers is we bring why into the multidisciplinary agenda. Why is the most important question that we can ask as social workers. And actually, the why question is the connecting question in social work. When we ask why, it helps us to connect everything that we do as social workers to theory. It helps us to bring reflection into our practice, and it helps us to create a working framework and a plan of action. So the why question is central for all of us as social workers. And I sometimes hear students saying they don't ask questions about why. And when I'll say to students, why don't you ask why? They say, well, we think it's a silly question. We think we shouldn't ask that on placement. We think we should know, and so we shouldn't ask why. But why is never a silly question. Why is the most powerful question you can ever ask. If you think about children and child development, when children are growing up, they get to that stage where they simply ask why all of the time. Whatever you say to a child, they will ask why constantly. And that why is really important. It's how they learn, and it's how we learn. And why is the most powerful question anyone can ever ask. It's never a silly question. So because this is such a useful framework, what, why, how, we're going to use this tonight to look at the theory fear factor. So we're going to look at what are our fears around theory. Then we're going to look at why has a theory fear factor developed in social work. And then perhaps the thing that most people are keen on is how do we address that theory fear factor, and how do we apply theory to our practice? So that's the that's the presentation this evening. That's what we're going to focus on. But through that, what, why and how of the theory fear factor, we're going to ask all of you to join in, either through the chat box or through polls, so that it becomes more interactive.
Siobhan, I'll just stop you there. We've had a question come in asking how is the best way to implement theory in practice into children's homes?
Okay, well, that's a very, it's quite a specific question, and it's one I think, can I come back to that one when we get to the how question?
Of course.
All right, and I can talk about how we can implement theory. I suppose that specific question is looking at a particular environment as well, and the thing about how we use theory will also apply to environments. So we'll look at that. If you can remind me of that, Kat, later.
Of course.
Back to it then, if that's all right. So if we start off by looking at what we mean by the theory fear factor, I'm also going to ask you, what are your fears? Do you have any fears about social work theory? And if you want to include those in the chat, then in a moment, Kerry and maybe some of the others may tell me about what you've included into the chat around your own fears. But this is what I see as the theory fear factor. I've been a practice educator now for 25 years, and those of you who are not UK based, that might be referred to in your country as a field educator or a mentor. But it's someone who works with students in practice on placements. And so I will ask a student in supervision sometimes, they'll be talking about the work they're doing, and I might say to them, what theory are you using there? And quite often what I get looking back at me is a terrified rabbit caught in the headlights. It's just somebody there who they just look terrified when you ask that question. And look, there's a poll coming up now where already 240 people, 260 people, it's going up all of the time. The number of people who feel like that when they're asked that question, it almost seems like it's such a terrifying question to be asked. What theory are you using there? And I think students can have lots of different concerns, and there's lots of different reasons that what we got there, 88% of those of you who are watching recognise yourself in that frightened rabbit in the headlights. But there can be lots of fears, I think, that students have, and they can include these. You know, these are the kinds of things that students over the years have said to me, I just don't understand it, Siobhan, I just don't get theory, or it all just seems very complex to me. Sometimes students will say, well, I've only just learned it in a classroom. How am I supposed to apply it to practice? How do I use it? What do I do in this situation? How do I link it? Sometimes then students and qualified practitioners too will say, well, what if they ask me more about it? I know that sometimes social workers are frightened of putting theory into court reports in case they get asked more about it and they don't feel confident about the questions they might be asked. There's fears about, well, how is it going to work in practice? Will it work the way I've been taught it? And there's also fears about, will I get it right? You know, if I'm asked a question, will I give the right answer to what theory am I asking there? So there's lots of fears, I think, that students can have about theory in practice. I'm hoping that people have maybe added some of their own fears, or whether they think the fears that I've shared are the fears that they have. But Kerry, in the chat, have you picked up any fears from the chat at all?
So people definitely are concerned about kind of getting it wrong, or even if they implement it in the right way, getting the name wrong and not being able to put kind of the technical name to what they're doing. There's been quite a few people saying that it's quite overwhelming, the amount of different theories there are, so knowing which the right one is at the right time. And some people have also said that they've been told kind of by more senior social workers, or indeed there seems to be a few kind of practicing social workers in the group, that actually sometimes you just don't have time to use theory in practice, and it's kind of, if you don't think about it, you forget it. So it sounds like people have got very kind of similar fears.
Yes, yeah. And I think, you know, those fears that there's so much of it, sometimes it feels overwhelming. And some of those fears that you've shared actually take me on to the next slide, because, you know, students are frightened of theory when they're asked about it by their practice educators. But one thing you have to remember is that sitting on the other side of asking you that question is practice educators are concerned about theory as well. And they may recognise themselves as the frightened rabbit, because one of the particular fears that I think that practice educators have, or qualified practitioners have, is, well, I've forgotten it all. I don't get the opportunity to use it in practice. I'm too busy, so I don't use it anymore, and then I forget about it. Or they think, well, the student knows more than I know. I don't know the recent theory or the newer theory. You know, I was reminded that not long before the lockdown came in, I did an observation of a student supervision. So practice educators, when they're training in the UK, have to be observed while they're working with a student. And I was doing an observation of a supervision session. And before the supervision session, I spoke to the practice educator and I said, how are you getting on talking to the student about theory? And the practice educator said, oh no, Siobhan, I don't like doing that because they know all the theory and they're up to date on it, and I don't know the theory because I'm not using it anymore. So I really, you know, I don't like talking to them about theory. And then I observed the session, and they did talk about theory, but if I'm honest, it felt a little bit stilted. It felt a little bit like we've got to talk about theory because we're being observed here. And then after the session, one of the questions I said to the student was, how are you getting on talking to your practice educator about theory? And the student said, oh no, I don't like doing that because my practice educator knows all the theory and how it works in practice, and I don't know the theory. And the thing is, both of them were frightened of theory. And so rather than just talking about it and sharing their fears and exploring theory and keeping it on the agenda, sometimes they were dancing around it a bit and maybe avoiding it. Whereas actually what we all need to do as practitioners is really keep theory on our professional agenda. And we're going to look tonight at how we can do that. How do we maintain theory on our professional agenda throughout our career? But before we look at how we address the theory fear factor, we need to look at why there is a fear factor in social work around theory. So why has the theory fear factor, it's a bit like a tongue twister, isn't it? The theory fear factor. Why has that come about in social work practice? And I think there are a lot of reasons why this has occurred. But these are just a few of the reasons that I think we have a fear factor around theory. Perhaps the thing that strikes me the most is sometimes the academic expression of theory. I think sometimes the way that theory is written about is actually really inaccessible to people. Then there's almost something, we might call it an academic code that's set up around theory, that it's just kind of almost like theory is being written for other academics rather than theory is being written for practitioners. And I believe very strongly that the service users that we work with, that the people we support, have a right to understand the theory that we're making decisions based on. And so I think theory has to be written in a way which is more accessible, rather than, you know, some kind of, it's like almost feels like a bit of a club that only people who understand those words can come into. It needs to be more accessible. There's also, I think, not enough discussion about theory within the profession as a whole, and it can quickly fall off the professional agenda. So people are busy with other things and don't get time to talk about theory, they feel. So it quickly falls off the professional agenda. I think one thing that I feel particularly strongly about in social work is that there is a lack of clarity about what constitutes a theory, what's a model, what's a method, and what's an approach. And so when we use the word theory in social work, we tend to use it as a catch-all word to cover all of those things, to cover theories and models and methods and approaches. Rather than using the separate words, we use that one word as a coverall, and that adds to the confusion, I think. I set up a YouTube channel just at the start of lockdown, to give me something to do, really, because I was, you know, shut in and locked down. And the first video that I put up was about what is the difference between a theory, a model, a method, and an approach. And already, just in that really short space of time, it's had 2,500 views. Now, obviously, that's something that people are concerned about understanding if it's had 2,500 views inside, what, a 10-week period. So there is a lack of clarity in that area. And I think we need to clarify that much more in order to get over the fear factor. And there's also the thing about, there's so much of it. There is so much theory. And as people said earlier, they're frightened they might say the wrong one, because there's hundreds of theories that we could draw on. So when we get to the how, I'm going to try and show you how you never get the wrong one if we work through the fear factor. But there is a lot of it, and I think that's created a fear. But of course, everybody has a different why. So your why is, why are you frightened of theory, might be different to why I might be frightened of theory. We're all frightened of theory at different stages of our career for different reasons. So there are lots of reasons why there is a fear factor in theory. Are there any questions or anything that you want to pop at this point, Kat, or are we going to save those for later?
There's one that's come through, and they're asking, in your experience, how do families feel about us applying theory to their personal lives? They worry that the individuals will feel like we're putting them in a box and not recognising their uniqueness.
I think that's a really interesting question, and I can see where that came from when I was saying that the people that we work with have a right to understand the theory that we're using when we're reaching decisions. And I think in my own experience, when I've been able to talk to people about the theory that I'm using to think through their situation, there's been a couple of things. One is you have to be able to talk about that theory in a way which is very understandable and accessible, because that person won't have had several years of social work training. And another is that I think people can feel actually that they're being valued and their situation is being valued, because we're showing that we're really putting thought into this, and these are the things that we're drawing on. But equally, it can also help a service user, for example, to, I understand people, the question saying, I don't want the person to feel like I'm putting them in a box by using a theory. But if we can draw on a theory, it can also enable service users to see how their situation might be connected to the situations that other people find themselves in. And sometimes when you can feel a connection with others, that can actually help you to create change for yourself, to be able to think through situations. But also, if we were to think about what empowerment draws on, empowerment often draws on a sense of collective understanding and identity. So being able to recognize that actually there are patterns in people's behaviors, and there's models that we can use to support people through that, can actually, I think, be quite empowering at times. So that would be my response to that one.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, so shall we go on to the how we address the theory fear factor? And in this, we'll try and do this together, and following this, we'll maybe try and have a little bit more conversation within the chat around the ideas that you might draw on to address the theory fear factor. And already, look, we've got a poll going on here already before we even mention it, that one of the ways that we're going to talk about in addressing the theory fear factor is social work theory cards. And we've got around about half the group here. It's half and half at the moment in terms of this poll. So we're going to look at some of the different methods that we could use in addressing the theory fear factor. I think in many ways, much as we've just been talking about service user situations being very unique and us needing to use unique models or unique ways of working with people, then in many ways how we address the theory fear factor needs to be based on the person's unique why. So whatever your why is, you need to then look for how you address it. So if your reason for being fearful of theory is there's so much of it, then your how is going to be different to someone else's whose fear is about, I might get it wrong. So what we need to do is look for a range of different solutions to the theory fear factor. And I think to start with, I would say we should do what we're all doing together now and acknowledge the fear. Because if you acknowledge it, you can begin to address it and work with it. If you don't acknowledge it, you can't address it. So the first thing I think is to say, okay, I know there's a fear factor and this is why I'm frightened, and then talk to people about it. I think we need to keep theory on our agenda constantly, and you need to keep a commitment to that through your whole social work career. I know that there are people here who've been qualified as social workers for many years who are listening tonight. And I think that's great, because theory needs to stay with us through our whole career. Some students will say to me, and we've actually had a couple of comments before the webinar sent to us in preparation, but quite a few students that I've worked with personally will say to me that social workers say, oh, throw your books away now, you don't need theory, now you're in practice, you're in the real world, we don't really use theory in the real world. Actually, if we're working in a way which is devoid of theory, then we're not safe. If we're not using theory, our practice isn't safe. So theory has to stay with us through our whole career. And I definitely, those of you who are coming towards the end of your studies now or going into your ASYE year, one thing I would say to you is don't sell all your books. I so often see on Facebook groups people saying, here, I've got all my books that I've used during my training, I can sell them all now. Don't do that, because it's almost like saying I don't ever need to look at a social work book again, I don't ever need to use theory again. You know, keep hold of those things. I think they can be really useful to you. Keep it through your whole career. And then I'd say, you know, I've just talked about books, but then I'd say also think about different forms of media to improve your familiarity with theory. So use different tools. Don't just use books. There are books, lots of books on theory that are very useful, and different people will find different books helpful. You know, different writers will appeal to you and you'll find their style a good style. So don't just use books, use other things. So I think social work theory cards are really good. I also think they overcome one of those issues about people feeling, oh, I'll sell my books now, because one of the things about theory cards is they never go out of date. You get yourself a set of theory cards and they're with you through your whole social work career, because you can just update the pack each time a new edition comes out. So rather than having to buy a whole new book, you just update your theory cards pack. So theory cards, I think, are a really good medium for exploring theory. They're almost like, if you've not seen them before, they're almost like a set of flashcards which gives you some information about theory. Also use YouTube. There's lots of videos out there that help you to understand social work theory. Listen to some podcasts that are available now on social work that can help you think about theory. Use a range of different media. I think I can see Kat waving some theory cards.
I have the theory cards here, yes. So this is what they look like.
There we go. So Kat's showing you if you haven't seen them. So
they're very accessible and easy to manage.
Okay.
And great to be able to just look through quickly. So that's what they look like.
So I think that's what you need, is a range of different media. Don't just use books. You know, there's theory cards, there's YouTube, there's podcasts, try lots of different things. Don't stick with just a very staid reading of a book, because I think that makes it more accessible, more interesting, more useful for us. And I suppose I'd also say, to address the theory fear factor and keep theory constantly on your agenda, use the what, why, how framework in practice. So when we're working with a service user, look at what's happening here, why is it happening, how can I work with them? And that question you asked earlier, Kat, I want to come back to now. Was it about how can we apply theory in children's homes, was it?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Okay. So I would then be looking at this framework to help me to think about that. So whoever's asked the question, I would imagine is working in a children's home at the moment, or maybe is on placement in a children's service. So I would be looking at, what are we trying to do in this children's home? So what's the purpose? What's the aim of this organisation, this environment? Why do we have that aim? And how do we implement that aim? And if you start to work through that, you will begin to see theory is there. Theory will be there in the what we do, because it will be about safeguarding, or it will be about supporting independence or promoting independence, and there'll be theories in there. There'll be theories in the why we do it, and why are we set up like this, and there'll be models in the how do we deliver it. So using a what, why, how can help you to think through theory questions in a bigger form like that. How do we apply it into a children's home, for example? But then there's also other ways that you could answer that particular question. So another slide suggesting other methods is other ways of addressing the theory fear factor is to know and use your thinking style. So I think lots of times we talk about what are people's learning styles, and we use learning styles a lot in social work, especially when in education of social workers. So we talk about whether people are pragmatists or activists or reflectors, but we don't often talk about people's thinking styles. And if you go into, it's a little bit of neuroscience here, but if you start to explore that, it can be really helpful, and it also links into theories around human growth and development as well. But if we look at the brain, there's two sides of the brain apparently. You can either think in words or we think in pictures, and people tend to have a dominant thinking style. So they tend to be either right side of their brain or left side of their brain dominant. And so we will either be people who very much think in words, or will be people who very much think in pictures. One of the issues about theory is that it's very much expressed in words. So its theory is all expressed in words. Now, if you're a picture-based thinker, you can struggle sometimes with that. And this is purely based on my experience, but my experience is working with students, and I've been a practice educator for more than 300 students during my career, and worked with lots of other students in other capacities. But many of the students I work with are picture-based thinkers. They think much more in pictures than they do in words. And I can often tell that when we think about what theories we relate. So if I were to say to you, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what do you see in your mind? And already, look, there's people here, Kelly on screen and Kat on screen, doing a triangle. When we say Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people associate it with the image that goes with it. It's an easy one to remember because it has the triangle, and we recognize what's at the bottom and what moves up to the top of the pyramid. And so if you're a visual thinker, if you're a picture-based thinker, you need to try and work through theory in a picture-based way. So it can just be really helpful for you to try and associate a theory that doesn't have an image. Try and associate an image with it. Draw a picture of it if it helps you to think about it and remember it. That can be really helpful if you're a picture-based thinker. Or try and think through a theory using an analogy, because analogies are helpful for picture-based thinkers as well. Be creative with theory, as I've suggested. One thing I love to do with students, and I know Kelly's talked about enjoying this as an activity, but is linking theory with music. It's something that can be really helpful for people to think about. How do you associate theory with songs? So if I gave you a load of theories, what song would you link to that theory? Can be helpful, again, to help you to remember it, but also to help you to explore it a little bit more, what that might mean. And there's a great game that you can play using this called Name That Tune. And you can do this virtually as well, now that we're all using virtual methods. But for those of you who are students, if you lead a game like Name That Tune or any other game, if you could do that virtually whilst you're on placement, it's brilliant evidence of your leadership, of your ability to apply theory to practice, of your bringing teams together, keeping theory on the professional agenda. So play games with theory. I think Kerry was telling me last week they were playing Snap with the theory cards. So there's a whole range of different things you can do and games you can play. And there's suggestions in the set of theory cards for about 30 different games that you can play with the cards, and Name That Tune is one of them. So try and make theory a bit more fun. Rather than just reading a book, play a game with it. Link it to music, link it to a picture, link it to an image, because all of these things can help us to remember theory and think about it differently. We can also move on to specific activities that people can do to help address the theory fear factor. And there are lots of different tools that you can use. So Social Work Connect, the slide at the beginning of tonight, talked about Social Work Connect, which I've been making free during the pandemic for students. If that's maybe not available in every country, then the Social Work Theory app, which is available on smartphones, that's available across the world. And that contains part of the app, and part of Social Work Connect is what's called the envelope activity. And in this activity, you can put into there information, anonymized obviously, about a situation that you're working in. And that will suggest for you theories and models and methods that might connect with that piece of work. So the person who's asking, how can we connect theory into working in a children's home, could use the envelope activity, because part of the envelope asks, where do you work? So if you put into the envelope activity, work in a children's home, it would then suggest for you the kinds of theories and models and methods that might link into that. So the envelope activity is a very particular activity where you can make it link to, or you can put in information, and each envelope you do will be unique and different. It will suggest different theories depending on the situation that you've inputted into the envelope. And we've had lots of people using Social Work Connect, and that is available for people, as I say, or you could use the envelope activity also through the Social Work Theory app. I'm seeing on the poll there that quite a lot of people didn't know about it. So I think the slide at the very beginning of this presentation gave the information about it. If you haven't captured that, we can make sure that it's put there into the chat, who to email, and we can arrange for you to have some information about that.
We'll make sure it goes around on the resource list after this session as well.
Okay, so that's handy. We're sending out a resource list, so that will be useful. There's also Collingwood's Identikit, which a lot of practice educators use with students. So some of you may be familiar with that. It's written by Pat Collingwood. If you wanted to Google that, there's quite a lot of information on that. I think she's based at the University of Stirling. And that is a little kit. So there's a little person that's called Kit sits in the middle, and you work through a particular scenario that you're working in and look at the knowledge and the skills and the values that you're drawing on, and you can think about theory within that. So it's another method. It's similar to the envelope, but the difference with the envelope is you can do an envelope yourself, which is great learning, but then there's the electronic version of the envelope where you put the information in and that suggests for you the theory. So that's slightly different. Collingwood's Identikit, you work through what knowledge you think rather than it suggesting it. And obviously we've suggested social work theory cards as well. You can use those. I think they can be really helpful at addressing lots of the different fear factors. The way I designed the theory cards and the way the theory cards developed came out of my experience of working with students and practice educators who had these fears about theory. The thing we're going to focus on a little bit though in this particular webinar is a method that you can use if your biggest fear is about how much theory there is and you're not sure if you're going to get hold of this because there's so much of it, then what I would suggest is think about developing for yourself a social work theory tree. Now by that I mean what's sitting here on the screen in front of you is start off with, what's my approach to practice? What are the main approaches that I like to take? What's the way I like to go about things? And then if you work through, I would say to you, as a practitioner with many years experience, there's a number of approaches that I can use in practice, but I have some favourite approaches, the ones I really like to use. I like to be very rights-based. I like to be very hopeful in my approach. I think I take quite a trauma-informed approach. So there's lots of different approaches, but within that approach, each approach will have a number of theories that work really well within that approach and a number of models that connect with that, and the methods come out of the models. If you have the opportunity to watch the video that explains the difference, this can help you working through your tree. But if you think about your tree, you think about these are the approaches I like, then you can start to narrow down the amount of theory that there is. And theory cards particularly can help you to do this, for example, or you could do it by just scribbling lots of notes, but I think the cards can help because there's, I think, 115 cards in the current set. So 115 possible theories, models, methods. What you could do is work through those and think about which are the approaches that you like the most, and then which theories and models work within that. And then you drive your familiarity around your own tree. So your own theory confidence grows with that tree because you've got a particular area that you're looking at. Rather than trying to address everything, you're looking at particular approaches and models and methods within that. So I would suggest that that's one thing that you could really work on to address the theory fear factor.
Siobhan, I've had a couple of people ask whether the Social Work Connect is only free for students until September, or whether it's open to qualified social workers as well.
Unfortunately, it is only available for free for students and ASYE until September, and the reason for that is because quite a large number of local authorities actually pay for licenses for their qualified staff, and so I'm not able to make it free for all, because that would be very unfair for those authorities that buy it for their staff. However, if people did want it, we are going to look at providing individual licenses, and you could contact me and we could look at how we could support you to gain access to that if you wanted to. So thanks for that question. Hope that answered the question.
Thank you.
So they're the suggestions that I would make around social work theory addressing the fear factor. What I'd like us to do now, though, is have a go at this together. Now, there's quite a lot of people in, so how the chat's going to go, if there's going to be too many people to manage it, I'm not sure. But I'm going to ask you, before you came into the webinar, we asked you to watch or to listen to some music which had an associated video. And not everybody will have watched that, and that's okay. But I'm going to ask you to think about watching that video. So if you were able to watch it, so there's more than half of the people here were able to watch or listen to the music. If you weren't able to, then you might want to do this later, and that would be fine. But I'm going to ask those of you who were able to watch that music, listen to the music and watch the video, I'm going to turn the tables on you. So we started off by saying when your practice educator asks you what theory are you using, sometimes we get that terrified rabbit in the headlights look. So instead of that, I have a theory in my mind that relates to me, to that song. And so I'm going to ask you all, what do you think the theory is that I have in my mind relating to that song? And I'd like you to put that into the chat. And so that what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the theories that people think I have in my mind relating to that particular song. But before we go through what the chat says, I'm going to ask the panelists. So I'm going to ask the student group that are here now, what theory they think I have in my mind relating to that particular song. And I think because Kerry is moderating the chat, I'm going to ask Kerry first and then she can look at the chat for a little while. So if I ask Kerry first, what theory do you think I had in my mind, Kerry?
So to me, the song is about somebody having the chance to kind of explain their life in their own words. So I thought of narrative theory and just giving somebody that opportunity to tell their story in the way that makes sense to them.
Okay, so narrative approach or a narrative theory, thanks for that. So that's Kerry. What about Kat, who's monitoring the questions tonight? Kat, what theory did you think?
Looking at the clip, I came up with attachment theory. I was looking at the relationships between the child and the parent.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of attachment stuff in there. So people who've watched it may have seen attachment because people, the parents they're engaging in attachment behaviours with the children and the separation and so on through it. So yeah, there's quite a lot of attachment there. What about Kelly? What were you thinking of, Kelly?
I was thinking of something to do with like development, so like Erikson, stages of development, kind of having to build his own life after his life with his like wife and family is finished, and how he might do that. So like identity, something to do with that.
Okay, so there's sort of the 7 stages I think Erikson talks about, and all of those are demonstrated in the video. So yeah, I can see that. Mary, what were you thinking? Is Mary still there? We lost her. Can't hear Mary at the moment, so I'm going to go with Becky then. Becky, what theory were you thinking?
I was thinking about systems theory, just about the support network that had been existing throughout the relationship, and then what might happen afterwards. So sort of thinking a bit about Brothenbrenner and the ecological model.
Okay, so systems are very popular theory, and worldwide ecological stuff very popular.
I'm back now.
Oh, you're back now. Okay, Mary, what were you thinking then?
So when I watched it, I was looking at human development across the lifespan, again with the 8 stages, because you can see it from infancy to adulthood. So a bit similar to what Kelly was saying.
Yeah, okay, so human development stuff, great. Thanks, Mary. Chris?
So yeah, when I watched it, I thought about identity and how his identity is changing throughout the video and throughout the story.
Okay, so like identity development formation theories.
Yeah.
Could be any of these, couldn't it? Okay, Emma, let's finish off with your thoughts. What are your thoughts around?
Well, it's a tricky one, but I thought, because I noticed they're getting married, they're having a baby, I thought about symbolic interactionism, so the different meanings that people give to certain things that happen in their life. So yeah, that was what popped into my head.
Okay, symbolic interactionism. Thank you very much for that one, Emma. So lots of different theories being suggested there. Some similarities, say, between Mary and Kelly, but lots of different ones. What about Kerry? What's been put in the chat? Have people been suggesting anything in the chat at all?
So the main ones that are coming out are kind of attachment theory, grief and loss. Quite a few people have said the lifespan theory, and what's quite interesting is they've given different references for lifespans. Although they've said the same theory, they've used kind of different versions of that theory. We've had a few people say kind of ecological, person-centered's come up quite a lot, as has the PCS model.
Absolutely, and it could have been any one of those theories, couldn't it? It could be the PCS model. It could be ecological. No one ever, I've done this, I've asked this question many, many times. No one has ever yet said symbolic interactionism, but Emma came up with that, and it absolutely could have been symbolic interactionism. But it's not any of those theories, actually. What I had in my mind was a biographical approach and life story work. Because, and you don't know why I was thinking that, why that's the theory in my mind. But the reason for that is I was listening to this song on the radio. I thought it was a really nice song. I was, you know, and then one day I really heard the words and I was captured by it, and I found it quite emotionally, it choked me a little bit. And I came home and I said to my daughters were home at the time, and I said, oh, there's a really good new song out, but they don't listen to radio too. So I said, put YouTube up. And all of a sudden the image came up of this, the video came up. And to me, I was thinking the music and the video didn't connect. They went backwards from each other. So the song starts with them as a young couple and ends at later, but they as adults, but the video does it the other way around. So the video starts with them as an older couple but moves back to their first kiss. So it's almost like going in the opposite direction. Now, life story work, when I started as a social worker, life story work used to be you'd start off with where the child was born, and then you would build through to where is the child now. Nowadays, we do it the opposite way around. So nowadays, we would start with where is the child now and work backwards to their birth. So to me, it made me think about life story work, but that's what it made me think. The thing about when your practice educator asks you the question, what theory are you thinking about? There is no single right answer. So if you have a fear of, what if I get the answer wrong? There isn't a wrong answer, because if you can explain why you see a particular theory in what's going on with a family or an individual that you're working with, if you can explain, I'm thinking about this theory, I'm thinking about this scenario, then that's the right answer, because there isn't a single theory to any situation. Two social workers will go and see the same family and use a different approach because they see different things in the situation. So we all will use different theories. And the thing about the question, when your practice educator asks you, they're not really asking you just what theory are you using. They're also asking you why and how. So why have you chosen that theory, and how is it impacting on your work in this situation? And you can draw on a model, a method or approach, as well as a theory. So you should never be frightened by that question, because there isn't a single correct answer to that question. So any of the theories that you came up with could have been correct, but your practice educator asks you the question because they're not a mind reader. They don't know what you're thinking. You have to explain it. So you really just need to work on being clearer about giving an answer. There isn't a correct answer, there's just your answer. There's no wrong answer, there's just your answer. So in summarising all of this, the key thing is never to be frightened of theory, because theory is essential in everything that we do. Theory helps to aid our understanding. Theory helps support our decision making. It helps to improve our practice. It increases confidence, and it improves job satisfaction. There's research around the use of theory in practice that says social workers who keep theory on their agenda have increased job satisfaction, increased confidence, and theory can be fun. And once you've got over the theory fear factor, it opens up such a lot of new things for us as practitioners. And there's a phrase here, a small key opens a very large door. And I think that's definitely the case. So what I'm going to conclude with is to remind us all of the international definition of social work, which you can read there, and I know all of you students have been studying, but around the world what connects us is this definition of social work. It says that social work is a practice-based profession and it's an academic discipline. It promotes social change and development, social cohesion, and the empowerment and liberation of people. Principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, and respect for diversities are central to what we do as social workers. Underpinned by theories of social work, social sciences, humanities, and Indigenous knowledge, social work engages people and structures to address life challenges and enhance well-being. And I've put in bold there, underpinned by theories, because what we do is underpinned by theory, and we need to be conscious of the theory that we use. But whilst that international definition is up there, and whilst we've got social workers from all around the world joining together to think about theory, I just want to say that we should never have a group of social workers coming together at the moment without making reference to the Black Lives Matter campaign. Black Lives Matter, and we all need to connect to promote social justice and human rights all over the world. And we can see that those are being undermined constantly in many ways, and it's the key role of us as social workers. George Floyd's murder was watched all around the world, and I'm hoping will be a major catalyst for change, the Black Lives Matter campaign. I'm hoping that we can begin to see and bring about change as social workers. And thinking about bringing about change, I just want to conclude before, if there are any questions we can have, to just say that I had an idea 10 days ago of doing some webinars on theory and reflection to support students during the pandemic, but I don't have a fear factor of theory, but I have a technology fear factor. I am terrified by it. And so I put a tweet out saying, are there any students out there who want to help me? And this fabulous group of students who have been hosting and panelists tonight volunteered, and we came together as a co-production team to create what we hope is going to be a series of webinars. We are hoping that 1 week we will look at social work theory, and we will look at specific theories. And so many of the questions that we've received in advance about particular theories for particular areas, we will cover, hopefully, in future webinars. And then we will also cover reflection. So we'd like you to tell us what would help you, and if you want more webinars and if you would be interested. But the next 2 webinars that we have planned, they'll always be on a Wednesday evening, the same time. And next week we're planning to look at reflective practice in social work, looking at the stages of reflection, spaces of reflection, and structures of reflection. And then the following week, we'll be back to theory, and we're going to look at connecting theory with social work practice during the pandemic. And we're going to explore particular theories that are useful for working through the global pandemic that we're working with. At that point, I don't know if there's any particular things on the chat or in the questions and answers that we'd like to pull together.
There's a couple of questions that have come in, but also my video didn't show up when I was showing everybody the theory cards. So I just want to make sure that everybody has seen them so they do know what they look like. So
Okay.
They look like this.
Okay, thank you, Kat.
Okay, and the questions that have come in, somebody's asked, they believe that we can manipulate the way that we use theory in practice to achieve the outcome that we want or to justify the decisions we make. Is this ethically correct?
It absolutely isn't ethically correct, but I do think that some people do that. I do think that some people either reach a decision and then make some theory work for that decision, or some people will adapt. You know, I know some people will take bits of theory that they want and not use the other parts, and therefore skew decision-making practices. It is absolutely unethical, but I think it can happen.
The other question as well that's been asked is how can they enable universities to teach more of the theories and the application to practice?
I think that's an interesting question because I think theory isn't always taught in a way which is accessible, and different universities teach different theories. I think one of the things that you were saying as a group when we came together, some of you were really surprised by how it's not the same theory that's taught at every university. There's no national curriculum or international curriculum of theory. It tends to be what university lecturers are interested in or knowledgeable about that they teach at that university. So different theory is being taught everywhere. And I do think that student societies can come together and talk about the theory that they would like to have included. But equally, I think we can use forums like this, where student-led forums with student-led questions where we can address some theory in the future. So I'm hoping that people will be able to use these webinars to help them to apply theory in practice if they feel that they can't have an influence within universities. Is that all of the questions answered, do you feel, Kat, for tonight?
Just one more. Do you have any advice or direction on theories to use around risk and risk management? This particular person is in a CAM service at the moment, if that helps you to direct your answer.
I would say in terms of risk, there are a couple of key things that I would be looking at. And one is that there are really two separate models of risk assessment. And whatever tool you use, it falls into one of these two areas. So all risk assessments are either actuarial based, which means that they are based on statistical analysis. So they kind of come, that model of that way of working with risk comes from the insurance industry, but it's always based on statistics and likelihoods. So they're that's one way of assessing risk. That's called actuarial risk assessment. So if you ever come across a tool at work that has a scale, you know, like dash tools, any of these tools that scale things, that's an actuarial risk assessment. And then you have what's called a clinical risk assessment. Now, because it's called clinical, I always think of it as medical, but it's not medical. Clinical means it's an individual practitioner's decision about the risk, because they're looking at this very uniquely and individually. Actually, what we should do is we should draw on holistically both of those. So we should use some statistical analysis as well as our own professional judgment, layering those together to work holistically. And I think if you look at the pandemic, that's quite interesting, because we keep looking at all of these statistics that we know some groups of people are more at risk than other groups of people. And how do we then use that in our risk analysis when we're working with families looking at risks that we bring when we go to see them, for example. So I think it's about separating out your different risk models is what I would suggest. And then there are loads of tools of risk, and you just need to look at what's being used in the area that you work, but then stand back and critique that from, is this actuarial or is this clinical tool? That's my thoughts.
That's great, Siobhan.
We could always do a webinar on risk in the future if people felt that that was a popular thing to do.
I think that's definitely something that people would enjoy, definitely, yeah. Thank you for the answer. That's all from me.
No problem. Thank you for that, Kat. Is there anything from anybody else? I know people have been monitoring social media for us or the chat box.
So one question, I'm just going to quickly respond to a few of the main questions people have asked in the chat about kind of logistic wise. Apparently the social work theory cards are sold out. Siobhan will look into that, so don't panic too much if you haven't been able to get your set yet. And you will be able to sign up for the next webinar. We'll send a link out with the email. The main question for Siobhan that came up in the chat was, if kind of what theory you apply is so subjective, how does theory actually make practice effective, and how are we making sure that people are applying the right theories at the right times?
Well, how do we make sure of people applying the right theories at the right times? I don't think there is a right theory at the right time. I think that's the thing. That's what I think I'm trying to say, is that different people will use different approaches. And you might need to change your approach at times. What you might do is you might be working with a family and using one way of working, and you realise this isn't working for this person. It's not supporting them. It's not assisting them. And then you would need to change. That's when it's not right, when it's not working. But otherwise, I don't think there's that one's right and that one's wrong. I think we've all got to find our way, but we have to have a toolkit so that we don't use the same theory and over again. The only time it's wrong is if you're just simply applying the 3 or 4 theories that you know to every situation that you're working with. That's when it's wrong, because that means the theory is coming from you and being forced onto the situation rather than the theory coming out of the situation. And the theory should come out of the situation. I think that's the best way I can answer that, really. And I would suggest, therefore, looking at things like the envelope activity that will bring the theory suggested out of that situation for you to be looking at. And to come back to the point about the theory cards being sold out, I'm not sure where that might be, Kerry. If that's on a forum like Amazon or something, that may be the case, but certainly they can be ordered directly from our website, which if you put perhaps the link in there from that, they're not sold out from our website. So
we had a question, just you've kind of answered it before, Siobhan, but it was saying about, due to the current pandemic, do you think there'll be one clear theory that comes through and is used a lot?
I definitely do, and that's what we're going to cover in the webinar 2 weeks today. So the next theory webinar will all be about, I think, the key theory that is going to draw everything together, and it's not just the pandemic, but it's also what's happened with Black Lives Matter and George Floyd murder, is death making. And death making is a really important theory for every social worker all over the world. And we're going to, and it's a theory that's not that well known, and we're going to really look at that in some depth at the next theory webinar. And I think that'll be particularly helpful for students putting portfolios together.
Can I just add, Siobhan, in terms of placement?
Yes,
to speak to students that do go on placement, I'd really advise use your supervision sessions to talk to your PE and have these discussions about theory, because at one point I didn't realise that I was actually using it. I had this feel like, oh, I've read up about theory, I understand how it, you know, can explain a situation, predict a situation, but how do I apply it? And at one point I realised I was actually using it without acknowledging that, but it was through these discussions with my PE that I was able to realise that. So use supervision to have these discussions.
Mary, I've got a really good practice educator, and she did exactly that. She would get the 4 of us from our local host authority together and kind of like mind map it and talk about our situations, and before we knew it, we'd filled like a whole wall full of like theories, and half of them we didn't even know we were using at the time. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. A good practice educator is golden, really, and can really help with this. But it is that bit about not being frightened to talk to your practice educator about it, and just talking about it. And that's, the more you talk about theory, the more you become comfortable with it, and that's important, I think. Okay, are we happy with concluding the webinar there? Is everybody happy with that? I'm looking to our chairs and panelists if we're happy to conclude. Thank you ever so much.
Just one more thing, sorry, Siobhan.
Yeah.
Just before we leave, can everyone give a bit of feedback when it ends? There should be a tick box to give some feedback, just so it helps us in the future, and it should direct you to like a survey page. So we'd really appreciate it if you could just give us a few words about how you thought that the webinar went this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. That's a really important point, because tonight has been our first webinar. We never thought when we started this 10 days ago that we would have social workers, hundreds of social workers coming into our webinar from all over the world. We hope that you've found it useful, and next week it'd be great if you would join us for our webinar on reflective practice, and we'll be looking at specific theories and models around reflective practice within that session next week. And I think you'll be able to get the link from that as of tomorrow. I think that'll be available. So, and you will get, I think when the webinar ends, then people will get directed towards feedback. Is that right? I'm looking at everybody. I think that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, that is right. It will come out afterwards, a survey for everybody to complete, which
Okay.
will help us then to tie up any loose ends.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I am seeing a couple of raised hands. I don't know if that means anything. I'm not familiar with that, but
I think that might be a goodbye.
is that a goodbye? Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much for attending. And
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.